Hello, hello! How's everyone feeling this morning? Just a few quick things before we get into our case today. First off, my extremely thoughtful friend had a cake made for my 100th episode. I believe it was a Boston cream pie cake. Dense, white, full of cream. It's delicious, whatever it was. Thank you, Liv. Second, I officially start my scuba diving certification tomorrow. I can't wait. I know I'm going to fall more and more in love with it. And I'm super grateful that I'm able to do it in bumfuck New Hampshire of all places. If you enjoy underwater peacefulness as I do, I must recommend trying it out. Or just go snorkeling. Snorkeling is underrated and free. Speaking of scoobity-doobity, I ran across Adventures with Purposes social media, and they are doing great work. Essentially, it's a team of divers that head to different bodies of water all over the United States and search for evidence in missing persons cases. I only recently came across what they do, but according to their website, these volunteers helped solve 32 cold cases as of 2019. Insane. I'll list a link below to their website if you're interested in learning more, what cases they've worked on, or even watching them in action. With all that being said, our case today takes place underwater. Today, I bring you the case of Tina Thomas. My name is Eli, and this is Murder in the Morning. My sources for today come from ABC News, a Medium article by Makungu Harrison, GMA, a Courier Mail article, and the rest I will put down below. A honeymoon is meant to be the happiest time in your life, just after your happiest moment, celebrating the future ahead with your one true love. Unfortunately, life isn't all pimples and roses. Newlyweds Gabe and Tina Watson arrived in Sydney, Australia in October of 2003, just days after their wedding on the 11th. Over the course of a week, Tina and Gabe walked around Sydney, perused street shops, and immersed themselves in a new and beautiful culture. Before long, they ventured off to an area called Townsville for the final leg of their adventure. According to Queensland.com, close to the Great Barrier Reef, Townsville offers endless opportunities from outdoor and underwater lovers alike. From the Great Barrier Reef and its tropical islands to the lush rainforests and World Heritage listed national parks, this once quiet coastal town has merged into a modern metropolis. Gabe, an experienced rescue scuba diver, planned a shipwreck dive to cap their honeymoon. The day before, Gabe refused an orientation dive, citing that he felt confident in his skills. Tina, in turn, also missed this orientation dive, although she was much less experienced. Quote, at 9 a.m. on the 22nd, the diving company briefed all of the divers and everyone started donning their equipment. Gabe and Tina had brought a lot of their own equipment, so the company only provided them with air tanks. With all their equipment on, Gabe and Tina, accompanied by 4 other divers, headed deep into the belly of the ocean. It was just moments later that they resurfaced. Gabe had trouble with his diving computer, which is a device worn around the wrist like a watch. It checks things like depth, time, and oxygen levels. After messing with the batteries, he considered it fixed, and the couple headed back into the water. Perhaps this was a clue, ominous and foreboding, a signal to not go back in, to reconsider, get back on the boat, and go get drunk on cocktails like a regular honeymooner. Fatefully, they headed back into the uncompromising ocean, end quote. Christina May Watson, or Tina, was born in West Germany on February 13th of 1977. She relocated to the U.S. while still a baby, and on January 24th, 1980, she was legally adopted by Tommy and Cindy Thomas. They lived in Walker County, Alabama, with her younger sister before moving to Louisiana and then Birmingham. According to the Medium article, the couple, Gabe and Tina, had met as students at the University of Alabama. Tina was engaged to someone else at the time, but Gabe had his sights set on her. He asked her out over and over, but Tina would continue to remind him of the little issue that stood in the way, the ring on her finger. His persistence, whether it be romantic or creepy, eventually won her over. Tina and Gabe found themselves at the same New Year's Eve party, and it seemed like the stars had finally aligned. Tina had just broken off her engagement, and she was finally ready to jump back into the dating scene. She felt smitten by Gabe. She told her adoptive father of the nice man she had met at the university. She described Gabe as funny, a little weird, and a bona fide, gentle giant. The pair started dating, and soon enough, Gabe was asking Tina's dad, Tommy, for her hand in marriage. However, Tommy wasn't a fan of Gabe. He felt a bit off-put by this man rushing to marry his daughter, and his hesitance was well known, but that didn't stop Gabe. As we know, he's quite the persistent man. And soon, the two were planning a wedding, with as much detail and focus on the honeymoon to take place afterwards. Quote, Tina was excited to see the koala bears at the zoo and to visit the Sydney Opera House before they made their way to the Great Barrier Reef for their scuba trip. But when Tina's parents heard of these plans, they weren't happy. See, Tina had been diagnosed with a heart condition that caused an abnormal heart rhythm. It's called, and forgive my pronunciation, paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardia, or PSVT. Diving can be risky for all novice divers. Add to the fact that she had a heart abnormality, and her parents felt it was too big of a risk to take. Ever the understanding and loving partner, Gabe considered the fact that his new wife would be in danger and decided to pressure her into diving anyway. According to him, he had to do all the things she liked, so it was time for her to return the favor. Tina didn't want to disappoint her soon-to-be husband, so she assured her parents that everything would be fine. She began taking diving lessons and earned her diving certificate in time for the trip, end quote. But Tina had one final favor to ask of her father, Tommy, before the newlyweds departed to the other side of the world. Tina, as an adult, received a life insurance policy through her work, and Tommy was the current sole beneficiary, her dad. Gabe, before the trip, had urged Tina to increase her policy amount and to make him the sole beneficiary. Now, this doesn't look good. It never ever does in criminal cases. Could this have been a completely normal request from Gabe? Sure. But why is it so important to finish these details before the trip? Especially a trip that's well known to be risky for Tina due to her heart condition. How about you enjoy the time spent together and worry about insurance later? This wouldn't be anywhere near the top of my list during a wedding honeymoon planning phase, but for Gabe, it was. Tina relayed this information to her father, asking him to sign the necessary paperwork. But Tommy, already uncertain of this new man in his daughter's life, quote, convinced his daughter to tell Gabe that she had sorted out the life insurance, even though she hadn't. Tommy wanted to talk to Tina a little bit more about it after she came back from their trip, so Tina agreed, and this would turn out to be a very wise decision. So they hop on a plane, fly halfway across the globe, peruse Sydney, and now they're scuba diving. Tina and Gabe dove further and further down, struggling against these strong ocean currents. According to Gabe during an interview with 2020, this is when everything went wrong. Quote, within minutes, the severity of the current situation hit Gabe Watson. As soon as we let go, he said, we were moving quite a bit. It was definitely not what I was expecting, and neither was Tina. Tina looked at her husband and motioned back towards the anchor line. I stuck out my right hand, she grabbed it with her left, and we both started swimming back to where we came, said Watson. But the current prevented them from making too much progress. I turned to her, grabbed my inflator hose, and motioned to her, fill it up, thinking that she would understand. Put some air in your buoyancy compensator, and we'll start to float up, he said. He continued, nothing happened from the inflator hose. That was when I realized, this isn't good. We're in trouble. So I reached out and grabbed a hold of the BC strap right there, and I just pulled her in, and then I turned and started heading back to the anchor rope. I was scared to death, he recalled. He turned back to Tina and tried to yell through his mask, "Swim! Swim, Tina! Swim!" All of a sudden, I just felt this thwack across my face, and my mask got turned off to the side, he said. In that moment, Gabe had let go of Tina to replace his own mask. When he turned back to look, Tina was 10 feet down and sinking, he said. She was face up and she had her arms up. She was reaching out for me to grab a hold of her. I kind of just turned on my head, gave a few kicks down to see if I could grab her, and she was still out of arm's reach. And that, I just decided I gotta go find somebody. Everyone asks the same question here. How could he leave his wife? Gabe claims he wasn't thinking rationally. I don't think I was making rational choices at that point, said Watson. I don't know what I would have done had I stayed with her. I don't know that there is anything I was actually capable of doing, end quote. But, dude, you left her over a mask. I get it, you're underwater and you want to see, but you can still open your eyes underwater, even in the ocean. I've done it a million times. I wouldn't let go of a cookie, let alone my wife, to fix something on my face. That argument is invalid, sir. Dropping your wife, who's is weighted down, just so you could see. You know which direction you're going. Gabe then ascended in a slow, controlled manner, as with any normal dive, before reaching the surface and calling for help. Again, this doesn't track. He said he wasn't making rational choices regarding his wife Tina, but he could make the rational decision to ascend safely and slowly, all the while his wife was sinking helplessly below him. Quote, it was a normal day on the job for Wade Singleton, the dive leader of Spoil Sport. But all of that would change when one of the divers, Gabe Watson, burst through the ocean surface in a panic. He claimed that his wife was in trouble and she was quickly sinking to the bottom of the ocean. Wade used his years of experience and plunged into the water to try and rescue Tina. When he found her, she was lying face up on the ocean floor. He quickly worked to get her back to the boat, and it took him all of 90 seconds, a minute and a half. Wade took Tina to another boat close to the Spoil Sport where the crew and the rest of the people were diving, and he and another crew member started performing CPR, end quote. Again, here, Gabe's rational thinking escapes him. Rather than going to the smaller boat and checking in on his wife's well-being, or even asking for updates, Gabe stayed on the Spoil Sport, instead asking for hugs, as if she were already deceased. Tina was receiving CPR, and Gabe was getting hugs. Again, we never know how we'll react in life or death situations. I have no clue what I would do. But Gabe's actions truly strike me as a bit odd and honestly off-putting. When asked in the interview why he didn't go to the boat, why he didn't go to his wife, he said, "That's not something I can handle. I don't ever want to see one of my loved ones being worked on like that, ever." After 41 minutes of CPR, Tina was pronounced dead at 11:21 a.m. This young, passionate bride died trying to make her husband happy, and now she lay lifeless on the wet deck of a rocking boat thousands of miles from her family. Quote, John Downey, a cruise passenger who was a doctor and tried to help Tina Watson, told Gabe that his wife was dead. I just collapsed onto him, Gabe said. We all kind of just piled into each other and at some point fell to the floor. And I don't know how long that went on. I mean, I was devastated, end quote. However, this tragic accident didn't sit well with everyone. In the wake of her death, Gabe had the dreadful task of informing Tina's parents of her untimely and unfortunate death. Except, he delegated. He called his parents and told them a harrowing story that ended with his new wife drowning. Gabe then said he didn't have the heart to tell Tina's parents and asked them to relay the message instead. Tommy Thomas received a call that no parent should ever receive. Quote, his little girl was dead, and he needed answers. According to ABC, when Australian police interviewed Gabe for details on what happened, it then became more of an interrogation. Fellow passengers came forward saying Watson's story didn't add up, and police started comparing it to his dive computer. Dr. Carl Edmonds is a diving medical expert who has examined this case and was prepared to testify for the defense. He said that, in the context of diving accidents, Tina's death was neither mysterious nor suspicious. Quote, she was doing a dive to a depth that she had never been to before, in conditions she had never experienced before, Edmonds said. It all fits together as a very common drowning accident, end quote. An autopsy was performed with a few items of note. 1. She had no bruises or markings on her body other than those made during the CPR resuscitation. 2. She suffered from an air embolism. Okay, what's an air embolism? According to Healthline, an air embolism, also called a gas embolism, occurs when one or more air bubbles enter a vein or artery and block it. This is a potentially serious condition because these air bubbles can travel to your brain, heart, or lungs and cause a heart attack, stroke, or respiratory failure. Air embolisms are rather rare. They continue, you can get an air embolism while scuba diving. This is possible if you hold your breath for too long or if you surface from the water too quickly. These actions can cause the air sacs in your lungs called alveoli to rupture. And when they rupture, air may move to your arteries, resulting in an air embolism. Side note, before we jump back into it, the same article unlocked a new fear. I didn't want to know this, and you probably don't, but I'm going to tell you anyways. Quote, in rare instances, blowing air into the vagina during oral sex can cause an air embolism. In this case, the air embolism can occur if there's a tear or injury in the vagina or uterus. The risk is higher in pregnant women who may have a tear in their placenta, end quote. So, no more balloon roleplay for me. Why was Tina holding her breath? How could that air embolism have occurred? Even if she were panicked and under duress, I can't imagine she would take her breathing apparatus out of her mouth. Or stop breathing entirely? And she didn't ascend too quickly, so that part can be ruled out. It's weird. Even though Dr. Carl Edmonds said it wasn't mysterious at all, he didn't explain why. Quote, Australian authorities were suspicious of Gabe's accounts of what happened versus the evidence they gathered from his dive computer. Prosecutors believed that what actually happened that fateful day was far from an accident. It was alleged that once underwater, Gabe turned off Tina's regulator. He then held her in a bear hug until she went unconscious from the lack of air. When she was unconscious, prosecutors alleged that Gabe turned her air supply back on and left her to drift slowly towards the ocean floor. That's when he turned on his act and went to the surface for help. Some of the other divers had witnessed strange occurrences that same day. Some saw Gabe give Tina a bear hug shortly before she started to sink, end quote. The Medium article continues to point out other inconsistencies. The diving leaders had found it particularly odd that Gabe and Tina refused this orientation dive before taking on the tricky dive at the shipwreck. Tina was a beginner, and the dive she and Gabe had chosen was far too advanced for her. Or, right before they entered the water, Gabe had insisted on adding weight to Tina's equipment. Weights are typically used to help divers descend and do not usually cause drowning. Tina only needed about 8 pounds of weights, but by the time Gabe was done, she had about 20 pounds of weights on her. Surely, an experienced diver would know better than to give his wife way too much weight. In my first pool dive a few weeks ago, I'm just assuming I weigh more than Tina, and I probably only had 10 to 12 pounds on me. Nowhere near 20. Anywho, let's not forget the main sticking point in this whole tragedy. Quote, Gabe was an experienced diver. So experienced that he had a certification in rescue diving. Either he could have saved her, but chose not to, or something prevented him from doing so, end quote. The whole situation simply reeks. Gabe and Tina's body flew home to the States, whereupon a funeral was held. Acquaintances of Gabe reported weird behavior in the weeks and months following her death. Quote, Gabe was showing pictures from the trip after Tina's funeral when one of Tina's friends noticed one picture that gave her goosebumps. It was a picture of Tina next to a sign that read, "Caution, drowning." Either it was really unfortunate and a coincidence, or this man has a sick sense of humor, end quote. Gabe was also caught stealing flowers from her grave because, quote, Tina wouldn't have liked that bouquet. But strangest of all, he took back his deceased wife's engagement ring while in the funeral home. Time went on, but no one had forgotten Tina's death. Gabe, having never received the life insurance payout he thought he was destined for, decided to try and recoup his loss alternatively. In March 2005, quote, Watson launched legal action in Alabama's Jefferson County Circuit Court to recoup the cost of the couple's trip after the travel insurance company refused to pay out. He was seeking $45,000 for the accidental death, plus compensation for trip interruption, medical expenses, phone calls, taxi fares, fees for extra credit card statements, and unspecified punitive damages for mental and emotional anguish. This would later be dismissed by Gabe himself under the direction of a lawyer. According to the Courier-Mail article, in 2006, Mr. Gabe Watson began dating Alabama school teacher Kim Lewis, and 2 years later, they married. Some media reports described her as a, quote, look-alike to Miss Tina. In an interview with a local newspaper, the Birmingham News, Mr. Watson said he, quote, never saw Miss Lewis as a look-alike, and revealed that he keeps photos of Tina and Miss Lewis both in his home office. Kim has been very accepting of my past, said Gabe. She knows that Tina and I were crazy in love and doesn't make me have to forget that. And then, that same year, the Australian government believed they had enough evidence to convict Gabe for the murder of his wife, Tina. According to Wikipedia, after resisting extradition for 6 months, Watson traveled voluntarily from the U.S. to Australia in May of 2009 to face trial. At the trial on June 5th of 2009, he pleaded not guilty to murder and guilty to manslaughter, which he was convicted of. Crown Prosecutor Brendan Campbell pointed out that over time, Watson had given police 16 different versions of what had happened to Tina, and that none of those versions matched what the only eyewitnesses had seen. When Tina was brought to the surface, her regulator was still in her mouth, her tank still had air, and tests indicated no faults with her equipment. What went wrong? Campbell described Watson as an experienced diver, trained in rescuing panicked divers, who had allowed his wife to sink to the ocean floor without making any serious attempt to retrieve her. Watson did not inflate Tina's buoyancy control device, the BCD, or remove her weight belt, and had failed to fulfill his obligations as her dive buddy by not sharing his alternative air source. Watson was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison to be suspended after serving 12 months, end quote. He would end up only serving 18 months. Tina's family was devastated, and rightfully so. From their perspective, Gabe had gotten off easy. Their daughter's life was worth more than 548 days in jail, and American authorities agreed. Quote, in an unprecedented move, they decided to charge Gabe for Tina's murder in America, too. Double jeopardy did not apply since the charges were in 2 different countries. Continents, even. American prosecutors argued that since it is believed that Gabe planned Tina's murder while back in the States, the American courts have jurisdiction to bring him to trial. The court indicted Gabe in October of 2010 of murder and kidnapping, with a trial set for February of 2012. According to Wikipedia, Colin McKenzie, a key diving expert in the original investigation, who had maintained that, quote, a diver with Watson's training should have been able to bring Tina up, subsequently retracted much of his testimony after being provided with Tina and Watson's diver logs, certificates, and medical histories, to which he had not previously had access. Mackenzie claimed that Gabe Watson should not have been allowed in the water and never as a dive buddy for his wife, who had no open water scuba experience. Tina had heart surgery to correct an irregular heartbeat 2 years earlier, but on her dive application, she stated that she had never had heart problems or surgery. Professor Michael Bennett, a leading expert in dive medicine, stated that Tina was unfit to dive without clearance from a cardiologist. Plus, after completing a 2-day course in an Alabama quarry, Gabe Watson received his rescue certification, which is normally a 4-day course. He had 0 rescue experience and little open water experience. According to Mackenzie, quote, Gabe had no hope of being competent. He could barely save himself that day, let alone his wife. I don't believe he intended to kill her. Revelations that Gabe needed help to don his diving equipment that day underscored that he was a, quote, dangerous amateur who showed a complete lack of courage when he abandoned his wife. Quote, Alabama judge Tommy Nail ruled that the evidence of Watson's behavior following Tina's death was inadmissible. Nail also blocked Tina's father from giving evidence regarding Watson's alleged attempts to increase Tina's life insurance. And on February 23rd of 2012, which should have been the trial, Judge Nail acquitted Watson for lack of evidence without the defense presenting its case. He said that the state's evidence was, quote, sorely lacking and that the prosecution could not prove that Watson had any financial motive. Prosecutor Don Valeska said that this was the first time he had a trial ending in a judge's acquittal in 41 years. In the 41 years he'd been trying cases. Regarding the judge's decision, Tina's father said it should have gone to the jury for them to decide, which I do agree with. A judge's acquittal is... Oof. I don't know. Gabe and his wife Kim now live somewhere in the United States, avoiding any recent media as far as I can tell. And that, my friends, is the bewildering, confusing, and frustrating case of Tina Thomas and Gabe Watson. I tried to remain unbiased as I pieced this together and told it, but it's difficult to not feel empathy for the victims, and then I find myself taking their side and the victim's family's side. But remember, as unusual a circumstance as Tina's death is, Gabe was never charged with her murder, only in failing to properly aid her. I do hope you all enjoyed today's episode. I did have a lot of fun researching it and even flip-flopped a few times myself on whether or not I think Gabe intended to kill her. And I wanted you to be able to form your opinion as well. Like I said, without too much bias, I hope. As usual, stick around for a bonus story after the music if you're not sick of my voice yet. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. My precious. Alrighty. This story coming out of Queens is awful, but needs awareness. Written by Emma Sewell of NY Daily News. Quote, a terrifying tattooed mugger armed with a machete robbed and sexually assaulted a 13-year-old girl inside a Queens park while she was tied up to her friend. This incident is a parent's nightmare, Chief of Department Jeffrey Madry said just outside Casena Park where the sexual assault took place Thursday afternoon. Quote, all of the community should be very upset about this and be willing to come out and help the police department as we try to resolve this issue. The girl was playing soccer in the park with a 13-year-old classmate near the corner of Colden Street and Calumet Avenue in Flushing at about 3:30 p.m. when the suspect, who had braces on his teeth and a distinctive chest tattoo, approached and ordered them to follow him into the woods. When the children said no, the suspect flashed a large machete-style knife and forced them into a patch of trees. The man tied the two children's wrists together with a shoelace and sexually assaulted the girl while the helpless boy watched. The thief robbed the two children then of their cell phones and, quote, told both victims to wait at the location for 20 minutes while he fled on foot. After a short time, the children returned to their school where they reported the attack. EMS took them to an area hospital for treatment. Parkgoers were stunned that no one saw the attack or intervened, especially since the suspect pulled out a large knife. "Nobody could do nothing to rescue that baby," said Ray, a Long Island resident who worships at a synagogue close to the park. "There's so many people out there, and nobody could do anything yesterday." Residents were left second-guessing their future plans for the park as cops tracked down this predator. "On that side of the park, people get robbed at night sometimes, so you don't want to walk around there," said Omar, who's 20 and lives nearby. "But this was in the middle of the day. We are all very concerned." Ollie, who is 42 and has lived in the neighborhood for a decade, said his 12-year-old daughter is in 6th grade at nearby Rachel Carson, and she walks through the park most days to get home. She walked through the park to get home yesterday with two classmates and was home by 3 o'clock. But on Friday, Ollie picked her up from school because of what happened. "It never happened before because this area, we believe, is very safe," he said. "As a parent, for me, it's a shock. It's unbelievable. My daughter is 12 years old in 6th grade, and 13 years old is essentially the same age. It's something that can happen to anybody." Quote, "The entire police department is focused on getting justice for this young survivor. A tremendous amount of investigative resources were mobilized yesterday to the location for the sole purpose of identifying this perpetrator." Scores of cops converged on the park Thursday afternoon, where they found the shoelace that was used to tie the children together, and they also found a discarded water bottle the attacker had drank from. Both items are being processed for forensic evidence. The attacker is described as a Hispanic man in his 20s. He's about 5'5" with curly hair and was wearing a black t-shirt, black sweatpants, red sneakers, and carrying a green backpack during the attack. Besides the braces, the thief has a tattoo of a boar or a bull with horns and red eyes on his chest, said cops. And he spoke English with a very heavy Spanish accent. Cops were trying to determine Friday if the attack was linked to some kind of pattern in the area. The only cameras in the 237-acre park are at the entrance points, said police. Cops were poring over the surveillance footage, as well as videos from cameras at stores and residential homes nearby to learn where the suspect may have headed after the attack. NYPD Deputy Commissioner said that the department will be flying drones over the park and placing cameras, ones that people can see and others that will be hidden in the green space so parkgoers can feel safer. Anyone with information regarding the man's whereabouts is urged to call the NYPD Crime Stoppers at 800-577-TIPS, and all calls will be kept confidential. End quote. I know my reach is teensy tiny, but I will put a picture in the description of this man attacker for anyone who may possibly be in the New York area. That is all I have for you amazing folks today. Thank you. Wouldn't be here without y'all. Have a great week, and I will see you on Thursday. Okie dokie. Bye-bye. Love you.